That will get you spotted in 10 seconds, old man. Derek Vance said it with a smile, but he said it into a live microphone, in front of 47 people, 2 sponsor cameras, 6 search team volunteers, and the granddaughter standing beside the rusted blue pickup who had driven Walter Harlan there because his hands sometimes shook on cold mornings. The laugh that followed was not loud at first. It rolled across the gravel staging area at Black Spruce Reserve like something people wanted permission to feel. A young man in a carbon-patterned jacket looked at Walter's gray wool overshirt, the frayed cuffs, the old leather boots, the dented steel canteen hanging from a faded strap, and shook his head as if the whole man had wandered out of a museum exhibit by mistake. Behind Derek, a folding table held more technology than Walter had ever owned at one time. 2 drones, thermal optics, a tablet showing a satellite map of all 260 acres, 14 trail cameras marked with orange tape, and a row of radios charging under a white event tent with 3 outdoor brands printed on the side. Derek had the cameras, the audience, the equipment, and the voice people listened to. Walter had a wool shirt older than half the men laughing at it. He stood at the southern edge of the reserve, where red dirt turned into wet grass and wet grass disappeared under black spruce, cedar, alder, and low pockets of fog that never fully burned off in October. The air smelled of pine sap, damp leaves, coffee from a paper cup, and the faint plastic heat of battery packs. Walter did not look embarrassed. That made it worse for some of them. He only moved his thumb once along the strap of his canteen, slow and unconscious, over a pale scar that crossed the knuckle like a line someone had tried to erase but never could. Maggie Harlan, 17, kept her jaw tight. She had heard people call her grandfather quiet, stubborn, old-fashioned, even strange, but she had never heard a grown man turn him into a joke for strangers before. Derek lifted one hand toward the woods, as if presenting a problem already solved. "The challenge is simple," he said. "Mr. Harlan here thinks old-school fieldcraft can beat modern detection. He gets a 10-minute head start. My team gets drones, thermal, trail cams, radios, and a live map. If we catch one clean visual before he reaches the north cabin, he's done." A few heads nodded. The power in the clearing belonged to Derek, and everyone knew it. Then Walter looked past the cameras, past Derek, past the bright equipment, toward the treetops bending almost imperceptibly east. His voice came out low, dry, and calm. "Wind shifting after 4? Ranger Paul Whitaker, who had been checking the rules clipboard, stopped writing. Nobody else understood why that question mattered. But Whitaker looked up at the old Marine as if he had just heard a door open in a house that was supposed to be empty. Walter Harlan had not come to Black Spruce Reserve to prove that Derek Vance was wrong. That was what Maggie understood better than anyone standing under the white tent. 3 mornings earlier, before the cameras, before the sponsor table, before strangers had permission to laugh at him, Walter had been sitting at the small kitchen table in his house outside, musing with a chipped white coffee mug between both hands, listening to the percolator click itself quiet on the counter. His house was the kind of place people drove past without noticing. Cedar siding darkened by weather, a gravel drive with weeds in the middle, storm windows he had repaired himself every fall since 1986. Nothing matched, but everything worked. His wool shirt hung from a brass hook near the back door, brushed clean and patched at the left elbow with darker gray cloth his late wife, Caroline, had sewn on years before her hands got too stiff for needles. Walter still touched that patch when he took the shirt down, not for luck, not exactly, but because some habits are really just memories that learned how to stay useful. On the kitchen wall, above a calendar from the local feed store, there was a faded photograph of a younger Walter standing with 4 Marines beside a canvas tent somewhere dry and bright, all of them squinting into sunlight, all of them pretending not to be tired. Beside the photograph hung an old Linsatic compass with a cracked cover, a field notebook wrapped in a rubber band, and a pocket knife with the bone handle worn smooth from years of thumb pressure. He never displayed medals. Maggie had found them once in a cigar box under folded tax records, each ribbon wrapped in tissue paper, not hidden with shame, but stored like something private. Walter's life had become small in the way many honorable lives become small after the noise is over. He fixed the mailbox for the widow down the road without telling her. He left split firewood on Pastor Bell's porch when the first freeze came early. He sharpened garden tools for neighbors who still called him Mr. Harlan even after 30 years. Every morning he walked 2.7 miles along the same tree line, stopping to pick up cans, checking the culvert after rain, moving fallen branches from the road with the patient irritation of a man who believed the world stayed decent only because quiet people kept doing small things. When Maggie showed him Derek's video mocking old fieldcraft, Walter watched it once. His face did not change. But when Derek said old men confuse memory with skill, Walter set the phone face down on the table and looked toward the wool shirt by the door. He did not seem angry. He seemed sad for a younger man who had mistaken new equipment for wisdom. Then he stood, rinsed his mug, took the compass from the wall, and placed it gently in his shirt pocket like he was answering a call nobody else had heard. Derek Vance had built his name by being right in public. That was the part people around him forgot when they called him arrogant, and the part Derek himself remembered whenever doubt came too close. 10 years earlier, he had been a lean kid from Traverse City with a borrowed pack, a cracked phone screen, and a father who believed praise made boys soft. His first videos were not polished. They were rough clips of him testing cheap rain gear behind his mother's garage, sleeping under tarps in November, walking frozen logging roads with a headlamp and a gas station sandwich in his pocket. People watched because he was hungry, and hunger looked honest on camera. Then the numbers came. 10,000 followers became 100,000. Sponsors arrived. Outdoor companies mailed him equipment with handwritten notes. Men twice his age began asking him what boots to buy, what radios to carry, what jacket would keep them alive if the weather turned. Somewhere along the way, Derek stopped hearing questions as questions. He started hearing them as proof that he had become the authority he used to resent. At Black Spruce Reserve, he moved through the staging area with the practiced confidence of a man used to having space open in front of him. Volunteers stepped aside when he passed. The camera operator tracked his face before anyone else's. A young search team member named Kyle adjusted his radio because Derek had adjusted his first. None of this looked cruel. It looked normal, which was more dangerous. Power rarely announces itself as power when everyone has already agreed to obey it. Derek checked the drone batteries, tapped the thermal display, and explained detection angles to the group in a clean, fast voice. He knew what he was talking about. He could read a contour map. He understood how heat collected in low ground after sunset. He had trained with former law enforcement trackers, search and rescue crews, and military contractors who treated him seriously because he paid attention. His mistake was not ignorance. His mistake was that success had taught him to trust only the knowledge that came with receipts, screens, certifications, and brand logos. An old man in patched wool did not fit inside that system. Walter Harlan looked, to Derek, like the kind of man viewers loved for 5 sentimental seconds before the real test began. A human interest angle, a contrast shot, maybe even a lesson about why modern standards existed. But when Walter asked about the wind, Derek felt something small tighten behind his ribs. Not fear, irritation. The old man had stepped into a room where Derek controlled the rules and spoken as if there were older rules underneath them. Derek smiled wider because the cameras were still on. He told Kyle to mark the south trail and bring the first drone up to 200 feet. Then he glanced once toward Walter, who was standing alone at the tree line with his hands quiet at his sides, and for the first time that morning, Derek realized the old Marine was not looking at the course like a contestant. He was looking at it like ground he had already crossed in his mind. Walter Harlan had spent most of his life knowing when not to step forward. A younger man needs to be seen. An older man learns that being seen is not the same as being useful. That was why he had almost stayed home. He had almost let Derek have his video, his sponsors, his clean little lesson about modern equipment and old mistakes. He had almost left the wool shirt on the brass hook and allowed the world to keep believing that silence meant emptiness. But Maggie had been at his kitchen table when the video ended. She had tried to pretend the words had not hurt her, the way young people pretend when they are protecting someone older. Walter saw it anyway. He saw her press her lips together. He saw her glance at the photograph on the wall, at the younger Marine standing in sunlight with men whose names she only knew because Walter still spoke them softly on Memorial Day. That was when the decision formed, not out of pride, not out of anger, but out of the old responsibility he still carried like a folded map in his chest. A person does not let a lie stand when a child he loves might mistake it for truth. So now, at Black Spruce Reserve, with the drone lifting into the pale Michigan sky and Derek's voice moving smoothly through the crowd. Walter walked to the starting stake without asking anyone to make room. People shifted anyway, some with impatience, some with curiosity, one or two with the uncomfortable politeness reserved for old men doing things everyone expects to end badly. The stake was a strip of orange survey tape tied around a cedar post. Beyond it, the woods dropped into low ground where last night's rain still clung to fern tips and dead leaves lay dark as coffee grounds. Ranger Whitaker held the clipboard against his chest. "Mr. Harlan, you understand the rules?" Walter nodded. Derek added, loud enough for the microphone, "Once you cross that line, we are not slowing down for you." Maggie took half a step forward. Walter turned before she could speak. His face softened in a way it had not softened for anyone else that morning. "It is all right," he said. "Some things are worth being laughed at for." The words were not dramatic. That was why they landed. Even Derek looked away for half a second, busying himself with the tablet, as if the screen suddenly needed him. Walter reached into his shirt pocket and touched the cracked compass, then the folded piece of paper behind it, the one Maggie had never seen clearly. For names were written there in faded blue ink. He had carried them for 53 years. Then he stepped across the orange tape into the damp grass, not like a competitor entering a game, but like a man accepting a duty everyone else had forgotten was real. 10 feet in, the forest seemed to take the sound of him away. For the first 11 minutes, everyone believed Walter Harlan had already made his first mistake. The drone rose to 200 feet, its camera tilting over the spruce line with a smooth mechanical confidence that made the crowd under the tent lean toward the monitors. Derek called out positions with one hand on his radio and the other on the tablet, his voice sharp now, energized by the expectation of an easy catch. He entered south-southeast, Derek said. "Old logging cut. Slow mover. Gray top. We will have him before the creek." A few people chuckled, relieved that the world still worked the way they expected. Maggie stood behind them with her arms folded tight, watching strangers turn her grandfather into a moving target on a screen that had not even found him yet. At minute 15, Kyle shouted that he had a visual. The main monitor showed a pale shape near a cedar blowdown, low and still against the wet ground. Derek zoomed in. The crowd grew quiet, then smiled when the image sharpened into a torn strip of gray wool snagged on a branch. "There it is," Derek said, lifting his eyebrows toward the camera. "Fabric failure. First sign." The words hit Maggie harder than the laughter. Not because the strip mattered, but because of how quickly they wanted it to mean Walter was failing. Ranger Whitaker looked at the screen without smiling. He asked where the branch was facing. Derek waved it off and sent 2 volunteers west. 5 minutes later, another trail camera triggered near the marsh edge. The image caught the back of an old gray shirt crossing open ground. This time the tent erupted. Derek slapped the table once and called for the drone to drop altitude. "He is exposed. Push him north. He cannot move fast enough." Maggie looked at the image and felt her stomach fall. For one awful second, she saw what they saw. An old man alone in too much open land, surrounded by younger legs, sharper radios, expensive optics, and a public mistake that would live forever online. Then the drone reached the clearing. The gray shirt hung empty from a dead tamarack limb, weighted with a smooth stone in one sleeve so it turned slightly in the wind like a tired shoulder. Nobody laughed then. Derek stared at it, face tightening. Embarrassment moved through him and came out as anger. "He is playing games," he said. "That counts as interference." Whitaker finally spoke, quiet but firm. "No rule against using what you brought." Out in the low woods, Walter paused beside a shallow pool and listened to the voices carrying wrong through the trees. He heard Derek's irritation, Maggie's silence, the drone's thin electric whine searching behind him. His eyes softened for a moment, not with triumph, but with pity. Then he stepped backward onto a wet stone, leaving no print where everyone was now certain he had gone. By minute 36, the first snow came down so lightly that no one under the tent noticed it until the flakes began melting on the black cases around Derek's equipment. It was not a storm, only a thin early-season drift from the north, the kind Upper Peninsula weather sends without warning, quiet enough to feel like a memory before it becomes weather. In the low ground beyond the marsh, Walter Harlan stood beneath a cedar whose branches bent close to the earth, his back against the dark trunk, his breath leaving him in slow white threads. He had stopped moving on purpose. Not from fatigue, not from fear. The woods had changed tone, and a man who had survived by listening does not argue with a change in tone. The drone passed somewhere behind him, a faint insect sound swallowed and returned by the trees. Farther off, radios cracked in short bursts. Young voices, impatient now. They were searching harder, which meant they were seeing less. Walter lowered himself carefully onto one knee beside an old deer trail and rested his hand on the wet moss. Cold moved through the wool at his cuff. He did not pull away. For a moment, he was no longer thinking about Derek or the cameras or the strangers waiting to decide whether he was still worth respecting. He was thinking about Caroline's hands sewing that elbow patch under the yellow kitchen light, her glasses low on her nose, telling him that a man could wear something out without throwing it away if the thing had served him honestly. He was thinking about Maggie at 7 years old, asleep on the couch after her mother dropped her off during a hard winter, one sock missing, one small hand still gripping his field compass because she liked how the needle always found north. He was thinking about the 4 names folded in his pocket, names the world had not forgotten exactly, but had never carried the way he carried them. The snow touched his shoulder and vanished into the wool without shine. Nylon would have ticked against branches. Plastic buckles would have clicked. Bright synthetic fabric would have held the cold light in a way the eye could catch. But this old cloth took the weather the way bark took it, dull and patient. Walter closed his eyes for 3 seconds and let the woods speak in small things. Water ticking under ice at the edge of a rut, a chickadee going quiet to his left, one set of hurried boots breaking sticks where no deer would step. Under the tent, Derek was telling everyone Walter had to be boxed in by now. Maggie watched the empty monitors and tried not to cry in front of people who had laughed too easily. Then, on the Northern Trail camera, a single frame flickered across the screen. Not Walter's face, not his body, just the cracked compass, hanging from a cedar twig, turning slowly in the snow. The compass on the Northern Trail camera changed everything because it should not have been there. Derek froze the frame and leaned toward the monitor until the blue light sharpened the tired lines around his eyes. The cedar twig was not near the north cabin. It was west of the marsh, almost 900 yards from where Derek had just sent Kyle and 2 volunteers to close the search line. "That is a decoy," Derek said, but his voice had lost the clean edge it carried at the start. Ranger Whitaker stepped closer, wiped snow melt from the screen with his sleeve, and stared at the small cracked compass turning in the wind. "No," he said quietly. "That is a warning." Nobody spoke for a second. The only sounds under the tent were the low hum of the battery station and the soft patter of snow on canvas. Whitaker pointed to the map. "That camera is beside the old beaver cut. Ground drops fast behind it. With this snow, that slope turns slick. If your team keeps pushing west in a line, they walk right into the washout." Derek looked down at the tablet, then at the radio in his hand. The arrogance in his face did not vanish all at once. It cracked in one place first, right where certainty had been. "They have the route markers," he said. Whitaker shook his head. "The markers are for summer. The north bank collapsed after the August rain." Maggie looked from one man to the other, and all the little things Walter had done came back with new meaning. The question about the wind, the wool strip tied where everyone would chase it, the empty shirt turning in the clearing, the false tracks that pulled Derek's team away from the low ground. And now the compass left exactly where a careless search line would need to stop. Walter had not been mocking them. He had been steering them. He had let them think they were hunting him because that was the only way to move proud men without asking their permission. Derek lifted the radio fast. "Kyle, hold position. Do not advance west. Repeat, hold position." Static answered first. Then Kyle's voice came through, thinner than before. "We are at the cut. Ground looks bad ahead." The tent went still. Derek swallowed. His eyes moved to the dark tree line, and for the first time all day, he looked less like a man filming a challenge and more like a man realizing he had nearly turned pride into consequence. Out in the snow, Walter stood 50 yards beyond the washout, unseen behind a black spruce, watching Kyle stop at the edge and raise one hand to halt the others. Walter did not smile. He only exhaled once, slow and white in the cold, then turned north toward the cabin, leaving behind one clean boot mark that filled with snow before anyone could find it. Derek did not apologize when Kyle's team stepped back from the washout. Not at first. He did something harder for a man who had built a life around sounding certain. He turned off the live stream. The red light on the sponsor camera went dark, and the tent seemed to exhale around it. "No more filming until everyone is clear," Derek said. His voice was lower now, stripped of performance. Kyle called in again, shaken but safe, and Derek listened without interrupting, one hand pressed flat on the table as if holding himself in place. Then he took off the branded jacket he had been wearing all morning and handed it to Maggie. "Your grandfather may be cold when he comes out," he said. Maggie looked at the jacket, then at him, unsure whether to trust the gesture. Derek did not ask her to. He simply set it across the back of her chair and walked into the snow with Ranger Whitaker to bring the search team back by the marked East Trail. For 20 minutes, the powerful young man who had mocked an old Marine carried extra radios, gathered orange trail flags, and helped Kyle down the safer ridge without a camera pointed at him. No one clapped. No one praised him. That was the point. By the time they returned to the tent, Walter Harlan was already sitting on the north cabin step on the reserve camera feed, waiting as if he had been there for years. He had reached the finish without one clean visual, but he had also left them a route home. Derek watched the screen in silence. Snow gathered on the canvas above him. The equipment table, once a display of confidence, now looked like a collection of tools that had needed a wiser hand. When the truck finally brought Walter back from the cabin road, nobody laughed at the wool shirt. Nobody mentioned decoys or rules or interference. Walter climbed out slowly, canteen strap crossing his chest, cracked compass back in his pocket, snow melting along his shoulders. Derek stepped forward, then stopped several feet away, giving the old man room he had not given him before. He removed his cap. "Mr. Harlan," he said, and the title mattered because he had not used it that way earlier. "I was wrong. I made you small because it made me feel bigger." Walter looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were tired, but not hard. "Most men do that once or twice," he said. Derek swallowed. "I put people at risk." Walter nodded slightly. "Then remember how it felt before you do it again." He did not humiliate him. He did not make a speech. He only reached into his pocket, took out the cracked compass, and placed it in Derek's open hand for one quiet second before taking it back. "A needle works because it admits it can be pulled," Walter said. Derek lowered his eyes, and this time, the silence around him was not defeat. It was the beginning of understanding. The next morning, Derek Vance posted the video without music, without a shocked thumbnail, and without cutting out the silence. He left in the moment he laughed. He left in the moment Walter asked about the wind. He left in the empty shirt on the tamarack, the compass turning in the snow, the radio call that stopped Kyle's team before the washout, and the long quiet after he admitted he had been wrong. He did not title it like a victory. He titled it with Walter's full name. By noon, the comments were no longer about gear. Men wrote about fathers they had stopped listening to. Women wrote about grandfathers who fixed things without being thanked. Veterans wrote only a few words at a time, the way men write when too much memory sits behind a sentence. At Black Spruce Reserve, Ranger Whitaker walked out to the north cabin with a cordless drill, a small brass plate, and Maggie holding the screws in her palm. Snow still rested in the shaded places, thin and blue under the pines. The cabin door had been wiped clean, but if the light hit it from the side, the little charcoal mark Walter had left was still barely visible above the latch. Whitaker did not polish it away. He mounted the brass plate beneath it. The letters were simple, Harlan Crossing. Not a monument, not a statue, just a name on a weathered door in a quiet place where people might someday learn to pay attention. That afternoon, Derek drove to Walter's house without a camera. He brought back the branded jacket Maggie had folded and left in his truck, and he carried a paper bag from the hardware store with wool socks inside, still in the wrapper. Walter opened the door in a flannel shirt, coffee steam drifting from the kitchen behind him. For a second, neither man spoke. Then Derek held out the bag. "I figured I should start learning with something that does not need batteries," he said. Walter looked at the socks, then at Derek, and gave the smallest nod Maggie had ever seen. It was not forgiveness made for an audience. It was something quieter, and because of that, more complete. Weeks later, when the first winter tracking class met at the reserve, 12 people stood in the cold beside the same orange starting stake. Derek stood with them, not in front of them. Walter arrived last in the old blue pickup, Maggie beside him, the gray wool shirt buttoned to his throat. No one laughed when he stepped onto the snow. No one reached for a camera. The room of trees simply went still, and a young boy near the front smiled when Walter bent down, touched 2 fingers to a faint track in the powder, and showed them how much of the world had been speaking before any of them knew how to listen.